have you all today. First of all, I would like to say to everyone that despite these challenging times that we're all facing, a situation of uncertainty during this time of pandemic, we do hope that you're all staying healthy and also safe wherever you are. And second of all, I would like to thank you all for gathering here in this two-day conference. To all of our keynote speakers, Professor Hassan Kakaya from the University of Melbourne, Australia, Professor Maria Teresa Gilbazo from the University of Navarra, Spain, Associate Professor Zafinas Muhammad Hussein from the University Kebangsaan Malaysia, Dr. Ahmed Bastawi from An-Najah University of the Palestine, Associate Professor Iman Prihandono from the University of Erlangga, Indonesia, Bapak Syahdah Guru from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Associate Professor Sukarmi from Universitas Brawijaya, Indonesia, and Ayuhana Zaima from the International Organization for Migration, Indonesia. And to all the speakers, the participants, the lecturers and students, and also distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening ceremony of the Brawijaya International Law Conference entitled The Transformation of International Society Towards Industrial Revolution 2020. This two-day conference is held by the Department of International Law, the Faculty of Law, Universitas Brawijaya. Ladies and gentlemen, and to all our speakers, to start our conference today, I would like to kindly invite the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Universitas Brawijaya, to give an opening speech and to officially open this conference. To Mr. Dr. Muhammad Ali Safaat, I give the time and place to you.
Mute, Pak Ali, mute, still mute.
Oh, it's my time. Sorry, suddenly the internet connection is have trouble. Okay, thank you very much, Nanda. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, especially for distinguished speakers. And I think for the first of this seminar, the speakers are Professor Hassan Kakaya from University of Melbourne, Professor Safinas from University Kebangsaan Malaysia, and Sada Guru from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also Bu Sukarmi from Brawijaya University. Alhamdulillah, thanks to the Almighty God for the abundance of health to all of us, and hopefully everyone in here is always healthy and continue to carry out our activities. This international conference topic is the transformation of international society toward industrial revolution. And the industrial revolution topic, I think particularly the revolution of 4.0 become a central topic, I think also in the rest of the world last year, and perhaps years or 2 years earlier. This topic seems to have disappeared this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic, because restriction on movement and traffic of the people in the world in order to suppress transmission, the lockdown in each country, as if bringing the society setbacks maybe 50 years. But the society has already changed and adapted. The industrial revolution, which last year for many people, maybe for people in the rural area, it's only an imagination, quickly become a real life. the use of information technology, artificial intelligence, and big data is already in daily life small entrepreneurs in the region. This pandemic is accelerating the shift from citizen to netizen, accelerating the formation of a virtual international society. Of course, this development certainly has a wide impact on legal regulation, and even form of legal violation that need to be anticipated. And I believe this international conference will be very useful to enrich reference in doing that. I would like to express my gratitude to all distinguished speakers. I expect to invite all of you, Pak Kakaya, to come again to Malang after the outbreak, and also the other speaker. And also thank you for all the participants of this seminar and for committee from International Law Department of Faculty of Law, Brawijaya University. Thank you again. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to Mr. Muhammad Ali Safaat as the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Universitas Brawijaya, for the welcoming speech, as well as opening this conference. We do hope that these 2 days of conference will give us all plenty of opportunities to discuss policies and procedures and share knowledge and insights on many related topics. So to all participants, the first seminar session will begin at 12 p.m. sharp Indonesian Western Time, which is around 2 to 3 minutes from now. The speakers are Professor Hasan Kakaya, Associate Professor Zafinas, Mr. Syahdah Guru, and also Associate Professor Sukarmi. This first session will be moderated by Ms. Rika Kurniati, PhD. And afterwards, for the plenary sessions, I would like to also inform to all the speakers and presenters and also participants to please write the code number of your plenary sessions before your name and institutions. This will help the host and also the committee of the conference to identify your breakout rooms. And just for your information that there are 2 seminar sessions for this conference, one today and also one tomorrow, both at 2 p.m. And there are a total of 16 plenary sessions. So for today, Wednesday, 21st October 2020, held at 2 p.m. until 3:30 are plenary sessions 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it will be continued at 3:30 until 5 p.m. with plenary sessions 5, 6, 7, and 8. This goes down also for tomorrow, Thursday, 22nd October 2020, held at 2 p.m. until 3:30 will be plenary sessions 9, 10, 11, and 12. And at 3:30 until 5 p.m. will be plenary sessions 13, 14, 15, and 16. And tomorrow will be continued by a closing ceremony. So I give now the time and place to the first moderator, Ibu Rika Kurniati. Thank you and have a wonderful conference, everyone.
Thank you, Bu Nanda, for the opportunity. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. His Excellency, the Dean of Faculty of Law, Brawijaya University, Dr. Muhammad Ali Safaat, respectable the keynote speakers, and the honorable all participants of this Brawijaya International Law Conference. Good afternoon and good morning for some of you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. My name is Rika Kurniati. I'm very pleased to see all of you today in this conference. And in this very first seminar session, we'll be discussing about the international trade and business law. We are very happy because today we have 4 keynote speakers from different expertise of law joining us. First, we have Professor Hasan Kakaya from the University of Melbourne, Australia. And then the second, we have Dr. Sukarmi from the Faculty of Law, Universitas Brawijaya. And the third, we have Dr. Zafinas Muhammad Hussein from University Kebangsaan Malaysia. And we also have Mr. Syahdah Guru Langkas Samudra from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. Before the presentation begins, let us know how the regulations of this seminar will be going on. First, each of the speaker will present their topic about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we begin the question and answer sessions. In the question and answer session, give the audience to present or deliver directly, ask the question to the speakers. And therefore, we will ask the person who asks to turn on the camera and turn on the speaker as well. And then after that, we will have the closing ceremony, the closing session in which the speaker will give their concluding remarks. Well, that's all I think for the structure of this seminar. And so now let me welcome the first speakers, His Excellency Professor Hasan Kakaya, who will present on international cooperation trade. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Hasan Kakaya joined the United Nations Conference in Trade and Development in 1981 and was the head of the Competition and Consumer Policy branch from 2006 to 2015. He specialized in international economic law, competition and consumer policy, financial regulations, international trade and anti-dumping. In these areas, he has advised governments, public and private entities, and young competition and consumer agency in more than 16 developing countries and economic organizations. In various capacity, he has been involved in teaching in this field and has contributions to 40 UN report and studies. Currently, he is a senior fellow in the Melbourne University, Australia. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I invite Professor Kakaya. The screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, opportunity for the kind word of introduction. Distinguished Dean, Dr. Muhammad Ali Sabat, Mrs. Sukarmi, the colleagues, thank you so much for the invitation and for the opportunity to be with you here today. I have prepared a rather long series of stacks. There are some 40. I wouldn't be able to go through all of them in 20 minutes, but they are there to look at through all the details that for those who might be interested in looking at them. So I will go quite fast on some of the slides, and maybe bear with me if you sometimes lose me about the slides. But before starting, let me perhaps summarize what is the main message of what I'm going to say to do. I was asked to speak on international cooperation in trade in the 21st century, in this time, troubling time with tension at the international level, with the international trading system facing major challenges, where the WTO, the main organ, has basically become dysfunctional, where sanctions and retaliation and protectionism is rising, and we face an unprecedented epidemic crisis that is also affecting the economy. My main message to say is that there are deep-rooted causes for this crisis we face today, and there are immediate ones. The immediate one is what we see, which is the dysfunctioning of WTO, the tension among the superpower, and also among developed and developing countries about global trade governance. And this, of course, is undermining the main confidence in the international trading system and the benefit that we will generate from it and has generated so far. But beyond these immediate symptoms, there are deep-rooted issues. And deep-rooted causes and explanations relate to the transformation of the economy. We have moved into the fourth industrial revolutions, the digital revolution that we moved in and we live in today. Many developing countries have gained substantial changes in their economy and gained a major share in international trade and exports. And at the tension between the rising new superpowers among developing countries and emerging economies is related to the governance of the new international trading system. And the question that arises, therefore, is, can the international trading system, as has been designed after the Second World War, still accommodate the aspiration of developing countries, allow them a possibility to grow and prosper, and at the same time continue the harmonious growth of international cooperation that we have seen so far? And that is what's really at the core of the current dispute, despite the definitions and on the more superficial issue of the tension between trades. So let me start. The first slide that you have there before you just mentioned that clearly international trade has benefited developing countries. Will you change the slide for me, or shall I? Is somebody going to assist by moving the slides?
Ibu Yasniar will assist you in the presentation.
Okay, so I'm in the first slide. As I said, the first slide is that all countries that have benefited from international trade and taken part in the international economy have greatly benefited from globalization and moved on in this process. Okay, I cannot see the first slide, which is slide 3.
First slides, please. Yasniar. To operate the slide, Hasan Kakaya slides. First slides.
Or I can announce them. So on slide number 3, I mentioned that international trade has benefited all countries that has been able to integrate into the global trading system. Unfortunately, many countries have been left behind. And the question, therefore, it's facing this current crisis is, will this developing country be able to benefit from the process? The next slide on page 4, it's very important. Yes, next. I can see. Okay, so if you can move to slide 4, please. Yes, next, please. Next slide, please. Now, here we see that WTO has played an incredible role in laying the foundations for a new integrated system after the conclusion of the Uruguay round, the introduction of the IP, the TRIP agreement, and set up a harmonization of rules for these countries. And the main dimension there is we can see that trade agreements enabled some kind of supranational in international cooperation to override national laws and to promote further integration, both, for example, within ASEAN and within European countries. And I think this is an important element as a first step in the development of the international economy. Next, please. The one evidence, before that, please, before that. Oh, it looks like you don't have the right slides, the right presentations. Because there are two additional slides which present the international trade in global economic integration and look at the volume of aid for trade, the number of the amount of aids that the international community has given in support of the international integrations. And aid for aid between 2006, when it was launched, and 2018 amounted to more than 410 billions. About half of that was in Asia, another half in Africa. So there was substantial amount of development assistance international cooperation that supported the integration of developing countries in international economy. When we look at the distribution of that aid, we see that, again, the least developed countries also received substantial part, but less perhaps than those which has given to more the middle and emerging economy, because clearly this is where the markets were for developed countries also to trade with developing countries in this process. Now, this process of integration, and this is where the slides in front of you, is that you can move forward, please, to the new US trade strategy. On that slide that you had before, which is slide number 7, the new US trade strategy. Before, there's one slide before that. 6, please, the slide before, yeah, the right. It is very important to know, because there is concern now that United States trade strategy is new. But what I found there, I want to draw your attention, is that President Washington, the first US president, when he left, and I quote there, he warned that there can be no greater error than to expect or calculate upon real favor from nation to nation. He advised that trade agreements should be temporary and abundant or varied, or as experience and circumstances shall dictate. So this policy of America first and rely on US and reviewing trade agreement is nothing new. In fact, US engagement with the world is only about 50 years, which stopped in 2009. So US national interest and priority has been at the heart of US policy, and it simply have been surfaced again given the new circumstances. We will see that. And US has, during the disputes in GATT and WTO, have made sure that its interest has always come first. Next strategy. That the new US, next slide please, the new trade policy can be seen that it has 5 major pillars. One is emphasis on national security. Second, strengthen the US economic economy. 3, negotiating better trade deal. 4, enforcement, very aggressive enforcement of national trade law policies. And the last is to reform the multilateral trading system so that it fits in interests. Next, please. Now, in addition to these changes in the policies, if you like, that on part of US, we also have to remember there has been structural shifts in technology, production, processes, and therefore international trade. Because we know from an economic perspective that international trade has to be based on some economic structures. And when the economic structure changes, also the structure of trade also changes. Now, the explanation that have been given here among the academics and summarizing the literatures, one is that the shift or rebalancing of the Chinese economy has taken a very large in the global value chains in the world economy. The second explanation also is that the fragmentation of production and the global value chains has come to an end. It's reached its limit. Next, please. Those are 2 dominant explanations. Now, I think what we need to remember, and perhaps here I would refer to the World Economic Reform Forum, which came out with a report 2 years ago, draw attention that this structural shift actually led to what we are living today is a 4th industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution was from 1760 to 1820, was the steam engine. The second revolution from 1820 to 1900 was the electricity revolutions. And then from the 1900, the third industrial revolution was computing. And today we're talking about the 4th industrial revolutions in artificial intelligence and the economy. So those shifts in the economy have underlined also a shift in the policies and the redistribution or rebalancing of power. Next, please. Now, in this process, the digital economy and digital trade play an important role here. And this shift, of course, has already brought new transformations in trade through reduction in transport, in coordination, the lowering of costs, but also enlarging the brand on the range of goods that are being delivered in terms of big data analytics, cybersecurity solution, computer services, and also the enlarging the goods of tradable goods. Next, please. We should also remember, however, that the benefits of this new industrial and digital revolution will not be equally distributed. It's certainly not automatic. The high level of concentration in the hands of few enterprises, the so-called GAFA and other the technology industries, and in the bank, clearly limit the participation of many countries, including the developing countries. Next, please. Now, the fourth industrial revolution, so-called Industry 4, we can go about the origins, starting from Germany, but in its implementation, from our perspective and in relation to international cooperation and trade, what we need to remember is that it has potential to connect both billions and billions of people and technology across the world through integration of processes, improving efficiency of trade, and also perhaps in protecting the environment. But there are also a number of concerns that this fourth industrial also bring about. Question of privacy, lack of regulation and standards, reliability and stability of the system, how different processes can be integrated, IT and implication for labor and loss of jobs, legal data security, and IP protection, which is one of the main disputes between China and US now. Now, next slide, please. The way the new trade rules and international cooperation has dealt with this, if you look back, you see that over the last 15 years, there have been changes, so-called new generation of international trade. And this new generation of trade, Indonesia participated in some of these through TPP, for example, or RCEP and others. And those new generations have moved, and I think this is the important point. They are based on two important concepts. First is that the notion of trade has changed itself. Before, you used to produce one good in one country and export it to another country. The global value chain has broke up this process. And therefore, a telephone exported from Indonesia is not a product from Indonesia. It has maybe 50 components, and the value added and change need to be netted before you look at the total value for this. But it employs production processes which are different. It calls for trade in investment, in IP protection, in deregulation, in competition policy. And this is different from what we knew trade before. Secondly, it also meant that the new trade laws and cooperation on this international law become more complex. You need to have different trade agreements that reflect the new structure of trade rather than what we used to have before. Next slide before, please, which was the you produce here and you sell there. So when countries negotiated concessions, you will cut tariff to allow countries to export to your country, and they cut their tariffs and borders in order to you to export. But today, this is not the case anymore. Today, what you do is multinationals which are involved in this global value chain production will say, first you have to reform your economy. You mean you have to provide intellectual property, you have protection, you have to open investment opportunities, you have to regulate and reduce government and state enterprises in the economy, among others, and allow me to invest in your economy so that I can produce and we export. So if we were to summarize this is, I'll give you my factories in exchange for your regulatory reform, in other words, behind the border. And this clearly calls for behind the border reform for trade and become a major component of international cooperation of trade that we did not have before. Next, please.
Sorry, Professor Bukaya, you have 5 minutes left.
5 minutes, okay. So let me move on. Yeah, thank you very much for keeping me on mind this. Let me now move on to slide 22, which is the WTO reforms. So we know that WTO is facing an existential crisis at the moment. The dispute settlement has been suspended, and there have been a number of proposals that have been made for its survival. You see on this slide that both Canada made a proposal. Next slide, you see that the European Union also made a proposal. On slide 23, the proposal for economic reform. And developing countries have also made proposals and commented on the proposals that US and Japan have done so far. Now, next, please. I want to draw attention to one other element. Please, next. The 2030 agenda. So what the next slide takes you is to say that, please, next, 26. Next. Oh, we don't have the, I see that it is not the correct slide that I sent. Okay. The debate I said earlier is maybe next slide, because then because I have only 5 minutes. So if you move. Yeah. I want to take the example, the Made in China 2025, as one example of what is really a dispute between economic reform. China and US seem to be a loggerhead on the role that the state can have in industrial policy, on accusation of the state playing a bigger role, of stealing IPR, etc. But when you look very closely, you will find that one of the major challenges here is that it is the developing countries who are moving in this fourth industrial revolution, attempting to gain a new development strategy. And in order to do so, have to design an industrial policy. And one example of this is the Made in China in 2025. And the main objection to it is that the state is playing a bigger role in promoting research and investment and development. And therefore, this approach is incompatible with international trade law. Whereas developing countries, for example, China, which is the first one to meet the collusion with developed country, argue that this is not the case, that actually this is essential in the current economic order for us to gain an interest to the world economy. So if you move on, please. So the debate on industrial development, debate on the economic reform international system is facing as I said here, it's at the core of the trade dispute between Washington and its trading partners. And China is just the first one to raise this issue for developing countries. Other developing countries will face similar situation. You can ask yourself, if Indonesia had made in Indonesia 2025 and reached the same level of development, what kind of situation will it receive in WTO? Will there have been the same implications? Would be the same thing if the BRIC country had the same situation? And my answer to this is, it seems to be, as a speculation, this is one possibility. So let me also remember, if you move on to see that, for example, when China, which is representative of many other countries, joined the WTO, it was made on very clear conditions. And here in China was that it must be a market economy. By some stage, it was given 15 years to do so, and that all its policies will be under close scrutiny to be compliant with WTO. Now, the question arises that does it mean when you join WTO, you automatically transform your economy from socialist or joint or mixed economy to a capitalist economy? Or can WTO accommodate different economic system. Next, please. So since I'm coming out only 2 minutes to finish, let me go to last slides about possible solutions. So what I say about possible solution to this crisis is that we need to require global trade governance reform to ensure an equitable, rule-based global trading order that will address the legitimate need of developing and middle-income countries in acquiring technologies, components, and know-how for the purpose of their own development. Now, the problem, of course, if given the structure, as I mentioned earlier, of highly concentrated industries in technologies and the rest, it means like there is a zero sum. It means that if developing countries today pursue their international trade and development strategies to acquire these technologies, it will be at the expense of multinational corporations from developed countries. And developed countries, multinationals, have been very strong in lobbying against these policies of developing countries as they reflect in international trade. Let me quote some research by Anton Milkin at Center of International Governance and Innovations. For example, he's required that China's industrial policy has been viewed too narrowly and without sufficient attention to long-term global governance by a large segment of the business and policy-making community. Therefore, the industrial policy should be viewed much broader. Concluding remark by Danny Roderick, which seemed to take a slightly different, the impossibility theorem, if you like, where he argues that democracy, national sovereignty, and global economic integration seem to be mutually incompatible. We can combine any two of these, but never all three of them. So you can have democracy and national sovereignty. You can have national sovereignty and global integration, or global integration and democracy, but not all three of this. Is this correct? Maybe this will be something that we can discuss. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Kakaya, for giving such informative presentations about the international cooperations. I think allow me to briefly summarize what Professor Kakaya has presented in bahasa. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, Profesor Kakaya menyampaikan tentang perdagangan internasional dan integrasi ekonomi global yang terjadi saat ini. Kemudian juga menyampaikan tentang strategi perdagangan dari Amerika Serikat. Di samping itu, beliau juga menyampaikan mengenai pergeseran struktural yang terjadi dalam teknologi, kemudian produksi, dan perdagangan internasional. Contoh yang diambil tadi adalah kasus tentang China, Made in China, yang itu akan dilakukan tahun 2025. Made in China atau MIC ini adalah inisiatif untuk mentransfer China menjadi pemain utama di kancah manufaktur teknologi tinggi global. Seperti itu. Kemudian beliau juga menyampaikan mengenai generasi baru aturan perdagangan yang ada saat ini di dunia internasional. Kemudian tentang adanya reformasi proposal ataupun proposal untuk mereformasi dari WTO dan solusi yang akan ditawarkan seperti itu. Jadi ini saya sampaikan sebagai pemantik diskusi Bapak Ibu jika ingin ada yang ditanyakan. Okay, that's all I think. And now we are moving to the second speakers, which is Dr. Sukarmi. Dr. Sukarmi is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law, Brawijaya University. Her expertise is on international trade law, contract law, economic law, and competition law. Based on her experience, Dr. Sukarmi was chosen as the Commissioner for the Supervision of Business Competitions of the Republic Indonesia for 2 periods. Okay, I think without further ado, I invite Dr. Sukarmi to present her topics. Dr. Sukarmi, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Miss Moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening and good morning for someone in this room. Distinguished from Hasan Kakaya, welcome again to Indonesia by Zoom. And my colleagues from Malaysia, Safines, how are you? And my colleagues, Sada Guru from Geneva. Yes, and all of the participants in this conference. Yes, I will talk about the destructive innovation. I think this is part of the big topic from the Hasan Kakaya, the digital economics and something like that. Yes, okay. Yes, destructive innovation of opportunities and challenges for business law. As a background, we know that the advantage of the technology and information is driving factor for the business. Yeah, we know that the business practices like e-commerce, digital economy, and etc. I think because of the technology and information. So the technology and information can make it no barrier entry or become the transaction in a transboundary transaction. There is no barrier from one country to another country, and the transaction usually from paper to paperless, and then from conventional to virtual. Yeah, all of the transaction, all of the communication now with the virtual, like we are now webinar on something like that. So one of the simple in the virtual, that is e-commerce, is important in the development of global IT culture. Next, now and the later times, like economics, social, political, and even culture activities will inevitably be more and more conducted by utilization the services of computer, network, and electronic telecommunication. I think Hasan Kakaya gave the example. For example, big data is very important for the business now. These activities with the paperless approach, computers and electronic telecommunication will take hold of a central position in everyday human activities. Now, what is the destructive innovation? Destructive innovation, based on the theory, is an innovation that creates a new market and value network and eventually disrupt an existing market and value network, displacing established market leading firm, product, and alliances. I take one from the Chang Chi-Hang. Disruptive innovation is a process by which a product or service takes root initially in simple application at the bottom of the market or in a new market, and then recently moves up market, eventually displacing established competitors. So we can conclude that destructive innovation and new market can disrupt the incumbent market. Now we know that I will give you an information about the internet user. This is the data table top 10 countries ranked by internet user to 2013 to 2018 in billion. We know that Indonesia number 6. This is the data. So the big country, the user of the internet is China. I think Hasan Kakaya also give the changes of strategy. China will become the big country to make a dominant position in the electronic, maybe in the next time. And this is the internet penetration. January 2020, we know that very small. Yes. Indonesia is number what is only 65%. Yeah, Indonesia 65%. Okay. And then I want to share to you about the major trend driving a business because of the impact of the IT from customer, trend category of customer, the trend from slow to faster services. And then services, more product choices. I think IT can keep very, very easy to get many product, many choice from the customer to get the product. And then integrated solution. What about in a service? And service become integrated sales and service, seamless support, and then flexible fulfillment and convenient service delivery, and then increase process visibility. Very easy to get something, just to click. We can message of the food or something like that, just click and then come delivery to your home or to your office. What about in organizational? In organization, the trend become the outsourcing and then contract manufacturing and then virtual distribution. And what is the impact on the new legal paradigm? We know that become a hyper-regulated society. What is the hyper-regulated society? That is as a result, the tendency of the state to regulate everything in the form of laws that when the public start to grow. So we can know that those what occurs as a condition that could be termed as over-regulation in the progression of social politics, social economics, and even social culture in many places. Because of that, become the shifting of legal paradigm. The shifting of legal paradigm, we know that today's paradigm legal, we compare at the tomorrow's legal paradigm. And now today's legal paradigm, legal services to advisory services, tomorrow legal services become an information services. I think now it happens. One-to-one become to one-to-many. Reactive service to proactive service. Time-based billing become commodity pricing. Restrictive to empowering. Defensive to pragmatic, and then legal focus to business focus. What about in a legal process? A legal process today, legal problem solving. Tomorrow, legal paradigm become to the legal risk management. Legal not only be on behalf by the jurist, but can become by to another jurist. Dispute resolution to dispute preemption. Publication of law to promulgation of law, and then dedicated legal profession to legal specialists and info and engineers. And then prince-based to IT-based legal system. This is the changes of the paradigm to the legal paradigm. What about in major trend driving business? We know that in the driving business, trend category for employee, trend hiring the best and brightest, keeping talented employees. Enterprise technology to integrated enterprise application, multi-channel integration, and middleware. General technology, wireless web application, handle computing and information appliances and infrastructure coverage, and application service providers. This is the major trend driving of business. What about in competitiveness factor? We know that in IT, became very easy to transaction. Lower set cost for buyers and speedy comparisons, lower prices, customer services, barriers to entry are reduced, virtual partnership multiplier, and market nice upon and differentiations. I think this is the competitiveness factor of the IT destruction. What about in opportunities? E-commerce, digital economic, or something like that, or a business are clear of business model. Space and then interesting website, simple to shopping, just click and then we can get something what do we want, and then delivery on time, customer services satisfied, and references. The impact of the small medium enterprises can open market and etc. What about the challenges of business law because of the IT program on digital economic or disruptive innovation? Is the existing regulation already adequate for electronic agreement? I think in Indonesia, like X number 11 to 2008 ITAX, for example, the issue of jurisdiction and legal issue can be applied to the internet, and the issue of law enforcement and confidentiality of such digital technology. For example, about private data, our data can be used by another person. We don't know how they can get our data. The issue of business competition, for example, that is very difficult to define what is how to define the relevant market. Even this is a product market on geographic market is very difficult. And also become, for example, cross-border cartel, maybe cross-border merger on something like that. I think Professor Hasan Kakaya is very fluent to explain about the impact of the competition because of the digital economy, etc. And then about the issue of authentication, about the IPR issue, and I think still many issue about the impact of the IT or disruptive innovation. I think we can give the some of example Indonesia, like taxi online. I think this is the one of the example about the disruptive innovation. So how the role of the government to the information technology? For the government, the importance of the role of government in this matter is because the required infrastructure to be developed needs investment in large amounts. Infrastructure of technology is a very important to manage the how to operate the technology aspect. And then to coordinate all effort to develop internet program in government administration system is above, that indeed needs to be an integrated information center supported by investment in major amount. And then this is my conclusion. I do not talk again. From what is I explained before, it is clear that in the future there will be many more demand to computerize the information and administration system of all national and governmental organizations, including in private or business activities. And then these demands appear because of the changes caused by the spread of the utilization of information technology services that are electronics in nature. The last but not least, in such situations, legal services and working processes of the legal system will experience fundamental changes. I think my presentation is that's all. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Sukarmi, for giving such informative presentations on the disruptive innovations of opportunities and challenges for business law. I will briefly summarize what Dr. Sukarmi has presented in Bahasa again. Because most of the participants are Indonesians. Jadi Bapak Ibu, dari apa yang telah disampaikan oleh Ibu Sukarmi tadi, ke depan akan semakin banyak tuntutan untuk mengkomputerisasi sistem informasi dan administrasi semua organisasi nasional dan pemerintahan termasuk dalam kegiatan swasta atau bisnis. Namun dari hal tersebut ini akan ada tantangan. Apakah regulasi yang ada sudah memadai untuk melakukan perjanjian elektronik? Kemudian masalah yuridiksi dan masalah hukum dapat diterapkan ke internet, dan bagaimana penegakan hukum dan kerahasiaan teknologi digital. Okay, I think that's all for what I can summarize from Dr. Sukarmi's presentations. Now we are moving to the third speaker, Dr. Safinas Muhammad Hussein. Dr. Safinas Muhammad Hussein is an associate professor from the Faculty of Undang-Undang, University Kebangsaan Malaysia. Her specializations include equity and trust, communications and multimedia law, as well competition law. I think without further ado, I invite Dr. Safinas to present her topic. Dr. Safinas, the time is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, good morning. I wish everyone a very good. Well, it's not morning. I think it's 1 p.m. nearly 2 p.m. in Malaysia. So I hope everyone is safe and well in these challenging times. It's good to see some familiar faces. I've met Professor Kakaya, I think once or twice in Malaysia, and then my colleagues from Fakultas Hukum, Dr. Sukarmi, and I would like to thank the organizing committee, especially Fakultas Hukum, for inviting me today, even though it's just online. Okay, looking at the theme of the conference, initially I wanted to talk about another topic, which is also related to access. I'm going to talk about access today, but initially I wanted to talk about another topic which is related to access, but from a different perspective of access, namely privacy. However, when I was asked to talk on competition law, I just decided to go with access generally, but specifically to access to network services. My slides is very simple. I think I can finish within the stipulated time. Not much words, probably just a few pictures. Next slide, please. If anyone has any question, because I think I'll be sharing the paper with the committee later, maybe you can get it from the committee. Okay, when we look at this word, access, which is in front of you, what comes to mind? Well, different people will look at it and conclude it as a lot of things. It can be as simple as access to a particular space, like entry and exit to a building, for example. In land, for example, you must have access to your land. Hence, you've got right of way, easement, etc. It can also mean the capability of making use of certain things or availability of certain things, for example, access to health, access to education. It can also mean access to communication. For example, today we are meeting here via an online platform because we have access to the internet, to the broadband facility. Access is of course not the same as a right. A right as a landowner, for example, because just now I gave you an example of land. Right as a landowner is not the same as access to your right to your land. Right to education is not the same as access to education, though they might be related. But I'm not here to talk about the difference between the two. In this pressing time, where travel is restricted and limited, access to basic necessities, be it food, health, is very important. And of course, access to Internet is also very important now that some of us might be confined to our houses. For your information, we've been asked by the government to work from home for the past 2 weeks. So access to the internet is very important now, and I think Dr. Sukarmi also mentioned just now, showed us the use of internet in the countries. Okay, this brings me to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, access from the competition law perspective. When you talk about access, it can mean access to market and access to services. If you look at competition laws from various jurisdictions, I'm sure there is at least one provision that talks about access to market. For example, in Malaysia, our Competition Act expressly states in the Act about market access in Section 4.2 and Section 10.2, where limiting market access will be an infringement. Market access refers to the ability on the part of the enterprise to sell goods and provide services in a domestic trade as well as international trade. Access to services, on the other hand, refers to access to services more often than not to services that involves facilities like access to network services, ports and airport infrastructure, rail networks, energy, gas, and water. For example, network services. In the case of network services, the provider of telecommunication services, for example, should give access to their infrastructure by new market entrants. Otherwise, the new players have to build their own infrastructure to support their services. Similarly, airport facilities, access to airport slots, for example, on reasonable ground and favorable grounds, should be given to airlines other than a national carrier, for example. Ferries and ships should also be given docking facilities. These are just some of the few examples that I can give. Refusal by a dominant enterprise to grant access to their facilities have often been assessed by reference to essential facilities case law, especially where the party seeking access is or would be a new customer. Next slide. Okay, in a regulated infrastructure or services scenario, service has been defined. Okay, means a service as provided by means of a facility, and it includes, as stated in the slide, the use of infrastructure facilities such as road or railway line, handling or transporting things such as goods or communication service or similar service. But it does not include supply of goods or the use of intellectual property or the use of production processes. Next slide. Okay, in a regulated industry like communication industry, the law requires the development of an access regime to promote the efficient use and investment in infrastructure, thereby promoting the effective competition in markets. Access is therefore important, especially where players or enterprises' activities cannot be carried out in isolation. Enterprise must be able to gain access to resources, for example, network, which are more often than not are owned by the incumbent. Refusal to give access often arises where the incumbent's activities are not limited to network operation, but extend to provision of services. And on some of these markets for services, the incumbent may be in competition with undertakings requesting access. As a result, they may be reluctant to share access to a resource they regard as having been built through their own efforts. In such a situation, rules are needed to ensure that access is indeed provided under conditions satisfactory for the performance of market activity. In the absence of a regulatory intervention, then such access would be ensured. An outcome would not in line with competition expectation. Therefore, we need regulatory tools to ensure that access is granted under appropriate conditions. Therefore, we need an access regime. So what is an access regime? An access regime regulates the national infrastructure services such as already mentioned previously in the earlier slides, like communication, energy, and water. An access regime also monitors market where there is limited competition. With the availability of access regime, service providers will be able to provide services to customers with less cost and prevent duplication, especially in infrastructure. Access regime also lessen barriers to entry in the sense that new entry into the market is able to enter without the need to build infrastructure, which will cause a fortune to them, especially if they are small and new in the industry. So what is then an access regime? Next slide. Okay, an access regime is a legal regime to facilitate third-party access to certain services provided by means of significant infrastructure facilities. Hence, like I mentioned earlier, access regime will lessen barrier to entry for new entrant into the market. It prevents duplication of infrastructure where this is not needed. What does an access regime deals with then? Regulators, regulators, national regulators, or maybe industry-specific regulators play an important role, especially in ensuring access to the services, ensuring prices are reasonable if negotiation fails, and of course, in managing access disputes. Access regime also usually deals with issues on access undertaking on access undertakings as access disputes and the role of the body that handles the disputes. Okay, usually what is an access regime? Usually the first thing is that the regulatory body will declare the services that will be listed to provide access. Once declared as an access service, the provider, or sometimes they have a list. Okay, the provider will then have to provide access to its services or to whoever that seeks the services or require access to their services. Secondly, the parties will then negotiate terms and conditions of access. If negotiation fails, then the particular access regime will provide the manner in which access is to be provided, for example, either by means of access pricing principle. Okay, some countries, I think the manner in which the procedure is stated might differ, but I'm just giving an example. Thirdly, at times, the regime provides the basic or standard access obligation. Standard access obligation here refers to the standard obligation that is imposed on access providers. It lays down certain standard on access. It lays down standard that needs to be met by the provider as well as the access seeker. Therefore, access provider may deny access to access seeker if the access seeker fail to meet certain minimum standard like technical feasibility, insufficient capacity, and this is important to maintain providing, this is very important, especially in technical feasibility, because we would like to maintain the quality of the service that is provided. For example, I know this is very technical, but I'll try to explain it in a more layman word. For example, last few days, my faculty, among colleagues, we were discussing about online teaching. An example was given that if you have a nicely paved road and you allow big tanker trucks or lorry to use the road will soon have potholes. Similarly, if you use a Ferrari, but the road that you use to go in and out is gravel road, then your car will be spoiled. So access is similar to that. You know, if you are a provider, the access seeker seeks to use your infrastructure, but there's no technical feasibility, you can deny access to that access seeker. Fourthly is access undertaking, which is a very important point. Okay, next slide. Okay, what is access undertaking? Access undertaking is a document that sets out matters relevant to obtaining access to a particular service. These matters may include terms and conditions on which the service provider will offer access, the price for the service, and dispute resolution processes in the event that the parties come into disagreement. So basically, an access undertaking is similar to a contract between the two providers. Sometimes service providers are required to negotiate the terms that suits them. However, in certain jurisdictions or in particular industries, the regime sets down the basic standard in providing access. All this depends on the state of competition in that particular industry. For today, I'm not going to go into specific country or industries as a regime. I just would like to highlight these issues or other points on access. As access regime is a lesser topic when we talk about competition law, access is a more favorite discussion on technical issues in regulated industries. Okay, I think I don't know, maybe I've gone a bit too fast because I was scared that I might run out of time, but I've come to actually my last slide. So in next slide, please. So in conclusion, access to facilities and services is important for the promotion of competition. The provision to provide access in each jurisdiction differ. In some jurisdiction, the provision to provide access comes first and negotiation of access comes second. In other jurisdiction, the obligation to negotiate access and should negotiation fail, will only the regulatory agency intervene and impose access. The result that the regulators seek to achieve by access regulation is actually to open up the market by the availability of unrestricted access. Even though I say unrestricted access, it doesn't mean that if you are an you are the provider, you are obliged to provide access by whatever means. No, of course, like I mentioned earlier, they have the right to deny access to the from the access seeker, provided that there's justification for doing that. Okay. However, not all services are subjected to access regulation. But once the services are subjected to access regulation, like for example, in certain countries, they have a list of, they have an access list, or sometimes the obligation to provide access is listed in the license conditions. And once this happens, the access provider is then obliged to provide access through negotiation, be it with the existence of provision on access or not. Okay, access is very important. As you can see, with the current state we are in, especially when it comes to network services, it is very important that we have access. And even though provision on access relates to service providers, but without the provision on access, we, the customers, will not get access to the services. Hence, meetings like this cannot happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Safinas, for your presentations on access to service. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, kesimpulan apa yang disampaikan oleh Dr. Safinas tadi adalah bahwasannya akses ke fasilitas dan layanan itu merupakan hal yang sangat penting dalam mempromosikan persaingan. Hasil yang ingin dicapai adalah melalui regulasi akses, ini terbukanya pasar dan ketersediaan akses yang tidak dibatasi. Mungkin itu nanti bisa dielaborasi lebih lanjut di question and answer sessions. Okay, before moving to the last keynote speaker, here there's announcement from the committee. For participants who may have any questions or feedback for our speakers, please write it on this chat box. And kindly write your name, institutions, questions, and to whom the question is addressed. Thank you. And you may also address your question directly later. Okay, now we are moving to the last but not least speaker, which is Mr. Syahda Guru Langka Samudra. Mr. Guru was graduated from the Faculty of Law, Universitas Brawijaya. It is mean he is my senior. Selamat pagi, Mas Guru. Mr. Guru finished Master of Law from the Faculty of Law, Universitas of Indonesia, and presently he is a Director for Legal and Economic Treaties of Foreign Affairs of the Republic Indonesia. Okay, Pak Guru, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello for everyone in Indonesia, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to begin by thanking the organizer, of course, Faculty of Law, University of Brawijaya, for inviting me in this International Law Conference. And of course, I would like to say hello to my longtime colleagues. Everyone is there, and also distinguished Dean, Mr. Muhammad Ali Safaat, and of course, say hello to Professor Hasan Kakaya and all other speakers, Bu Karmi and Bu Safina. Okay, I think it is indeed a great honor for me to speak and share my perspective among legal scholars here and also students, as well as the alumni, as well as I am also the alumni of distinguished faculty. In this occasion, I would like to raise the issues of the role of the World Trade Organizations, the sole international organizations regulating global trade through a format called multilateral trading system. I think in a way, Professor Hasan Kakai already presents some issues relating to WTO in the perspective of scholars, but I would like to present to you what is going on here in WTO in Geneva. Since I'm still here, I will be home for maybe around December. So since the establishment of the WTO in 1995, I think you can go to the next slide, please. Through the adoption of Marrakesh Agreement up to today, WTO has been influencing every aspect of our lives. It may be appear from the very basic matters like the foods that we consume or we eat, clothes that we use, and vehicles that we drive, game consoles that we also play every day if you love to play games, And also cell phones, for example, if you want to ring your boyfriend, girlfriend, your wife, so on, or even your professors. And in larger scale, WTO has also been closely affecting our professional work, such as providing certainties for exporters, traders to carry out their business, and also even more now with the expansion of services, it also including services in educations. So in real sense, influences that I have mentioned were possible since WTO rules provide provisions to ensure smooth flows of goods, services, as well as protection to intellectual property rights from one country to another. So it seems a very basic issues that I would like to present now. Through its rules, WTO system envisaged to lower trade barriers in order to establish smooth flows of goods and services. It also provides certainty and stability so that consumers as well as producers may reap the benefit from secure supplies and broader choices of finished products, components, raw materials, and services that they consume. The rules provide conditions that ensure foreign market will remain open. Other influence that may not have priorly realized WTO rules support the effort to maintain world peace. It is due to the reality, I think, that the escalation in trade tension, for example, among countries' economies may lead into a conflict. In a concrete sense, through rules-based multilateral trading system, trade tension may be channeled into viable remedies such as WTO dispute settlement process in order to avoid unilateral action, for example, by either parties that in the conflict or in the dispute, then may escalate into armed conflict in some way. We can go to the next slide. WTO rules keep evolving. WTO provides platform of negotiation for members of WTO to conclude agreements, arrange concessions, and pursue trade rights. The agreements, among others, bind governments to keep their trade policies transparent and predictable. Currently, WTO have set a set of elements, which I think all students and lecturers already aware that the agreement like establishing the WTO as the replacement of the Uruguay round, the agreement on trade in goods, GATS, on services, TRIPS on intellectual property, dispute settlement understanding for the DS issues, and also the review of trade policy of the member states. In 2001, WTO launched a new round of negotiations called Doha Development Agenda. I think everyone's already know and ever heard about this. This agenda, we can account that as an ambitious agenda, since it was not only aimed to pursue market opening through rule-making effort in various sectors, but also to integrate developmental elements in the multilateral trading system, so that it's trying to address what is in the Marquez agreement, that pursuing also the issue on sustainable development. However, the progress of the negotiation round now has come stalled due to the sharp differences between developed countries and developing countries. And I think Professor Hasan Kakai also mentioned this. In viewing the way forward of the negotiating round, major issues that halt progress are industrial tariff, for example, and non-tariff barriers to trade. In particular, the maintenance of agriculture subsidies by developed countries. Up to today, the negotiation remain unresolved and progressive. The one and only successful deal achieved through this implementation of Doha Development Agenda is the Trade Facilitation Agreements, which was adopted in 2013 in Bali, Indonesia, Ministerial Conference. This agreement, which is the first agreement to be produced since the Uruguay round, addresses the issue release of goods in border through simplification of custom procedures. So the uncertainty surrounding the way forward of the Doha round has pushed members of WTO pursue their trade agenda through regional or bilateral free trade agreement, which is Professor Hasan Kakai also mentioned. This is kind of expansion because of distrust and because also the agenda of the WTO could not move anywhere. from the 2012 until now, there are like a proliferation of the free trade agreements and preferential trade agreements. For example, for Indonesia itself, we now have like more than 10 FTAs, more than 10 FTA. We're talking about that concluded like Indonesia-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, Indonesia and Korea, ASEAN, China, and also now we are trying to finalize the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that consists of 15 countries in Asia, including China. India was in the club before, but now they out from the group because of cannot compromise in some of the issues within the RCEP negotiation. Now Indonesia also try to pursue to finalize the Indonesian European Union Comprehensive Economic Partnership that beyond the WTO agreements or norm. So it's now with this FTA, actually, this is the way of transformation or the way of shifting that Professor Kakai have said, that that reflected into the A+ agreements or E+ norm more or beyond than WTO agreements that we know. Okay, back to multilateral context. I think next slide, please. Currently, the only mandated issues that remains on progress in the negotiation of WTO is the discipline of fisheries subsidies. It is intended to achieve goal 14.6 of the SDGs that would like to eliminate the cost of the subsidies from the IUU fishing, then overcapacity and overfishing. However, the negotiation proceeding also, I think, bumps into challenge to move forward due to huge gap of views between developed and developing countries now. The gaps also exist because this discipline is not only addressing the issue of trade in relation to fisheries subsidies, but also on the fact that it needs to address global fisheries problem derived mainly by IUU fishing, overfishing, and overcapacity. This is a kind of anomaly actually, because while we're talking about trade in the WTO, but we also talk about the fisheries issues, even though we try to connect that with the subsidies, but the background actually was from the Sustainable Development Goals. Challenges of coordination between Geneva and capital, which derive from this pandemic, also a problem. This is a quite unfortunate and challenge, and this also reducing the capacity of negotiator in coordinating opposition. This is also one aspect that make the negotiation seemingly will be into trouble and to move forward. The mandate negotiation that also remains to be advanced in the context of Doha Development Agenda is the agriculture issues or agriculture subsidies. Meanwhile, the issue has been the root causes of state stalemate of DDA. Efforts remain carried out by interested members to revive this negotiation by proposing new disciplines. Here in Geneva, we have G33, which is Indonesia lead for this club, and also there's also Keynes Group for the exporters countries, and this negotiation also very difficult. So this proposition will be likely, I mean, this negotiation is likely to bump into red light since long-standing mandated issue, which brought the developing countries since the establishment of DDA, such as public stockholding and special safeguard mechanisms, that was also always a long-standing issues by developing countries. And in the other hand, the agenda of agriculture trade reform, which has been the priority of the priority of agriculture-oriented exporting countries since the conclusion of Uruguay round, such as reduction of distorting domestic support in agriculture sector, will be unlikely to move forward as well as in the near future, even in the run-up of the next ministerial conference of WTO in 2021 in Kazakhstan next year. Actually, this conference should be done this year, but because of this COVID pandemic, it was moved into next year. But again, it will depend on the situation. whether we can move forward to hold this conference. Current pandemics, when I said about the current pandemic of COVID-19 have made broad a darker cloud over the Doha Development Agenda, which has been under the black fog of trade wars, which is also mentioned before by the previous speaker between the US and China. And since then, the debates of the relevance of the WTO have been erected. A big question mark surrounding the WTO relevance have also been popped out due to the absence of the appellate body in its dispute settlement system and views on the ineffectiveness of its monitoring system. Calls for reform, which is Professor Hassan Kaya have said before, in making WTO more market-oriented versus pro-development, have also been frequently mentioned in statements delivered by many delegations in WTO. So, debates on the relevance now of the WTO has triggered WTO members to come up with initiative or action in the WTO, such as first, here in the slide you will see call to reform the dispute settlement mechanism due to the impasse of the appointment of the appellate body members. Since 11 December last year, the appellate body of the WTO has been unable to hear and review trade dispute due to blockage carried out by the US to the appointment of retiring appellate body members. Up to now, there is only one member remaining of 7, while the DSU provides that an appellate body or appellate review shall be conducted at least 3 AB members. Against this background, US has been principally raising questions on the legitimacy and consistency of the AB decision with the WTO agreements and conduct AB members in deciding in the case that put forward to AB. Further, the US, through the publication by the USTR, has suggested to reform the AB by abolishing 2-tier DS mechanism into 1-tier by promoting more consultation and mutual solution between the parties and the dispute. While this proposal sounds promising due to the promotion of mutual solution, it should be understood that this notion will not only be efficient and operative to WTO members with massive economic scale and political influence. This proposition is also on the contrary with the spirit of WTO dispute settlement, where members with various economic scale will own equal rights to defend their own trade interests before the panel. Even so, the current WTO dispute settlement has yet to be an ideal model to address economic scale imbalances, and therefore it would be a devastating reality to the developing members should US notion be real within WTO, and it will be a challenge for us. In addressing dispute settlement issues in WTO, many remains hoping that the upcoming Director General that now under selection can facilitate to address and solve these issues. The second issues in the presentation that I made on the debates is proliferation of the plurilateral process. This is set aside on the issues of the regionalization with the FTAs. Here in WTO, there are processes of plurilateral that have been aggressively advanced under the backdrop of effort to make WTO remain relevant. However, in an institutional perspective, these processes were never provided with multilateral mandates, as all of the past issues were considered as negotiating issues. In this context, some members view that this plurilateral process on lack of legitimacy and would establish complication or diminish the reputation of multilateral process. There is a big question mark surrounding this plurilateral process actually. How would non-mandated issues which pursue through plurilateral process be possibly integrated to WTO rules? And it will remain issues for the member, especially with members that involved in the plurilateral process. And Indonesia itself, I think we also actually involved in some of this plurilateral process. This plurilateral process have come up in various sectors now. For instance, in services sectors through joint statement initiative on domestic regulation in services, In the other hand, joint statement initiative of e-commerce also erected is in order to establish a fresh of trade discipline in electronic commerce, whereas issues such as the right of imposition of custom duties in electronic transmission will likely be a massive wall for in achieving this deal, because Indonesia itself one of the proponents of these proposals, and get along with India and also South Africa. Investment facilitation is one of this plurilateral process, also been issued pursuant through this plurilateral model, where the proponents for a new discipline out investment regulation and admissions transparency under WTO. While this initiative seems promising to move forward and achieve a concrete outcome, the concern of the framework legal implication arising from this process to the international investment agreement has been taking place. Some members, like Indonesia, raised concern on the possible use of ISDS, investor-state dispute settlement, in international investment agreement through the invocation of umbrella clause, which may complicate existing concern on establishing policy space for members. Third, the WTO reform. I just would like to touch a little bit, like what Professor Hasan Kaseh have said. Discussion on this issue have been spread out in various committees in WTO without a single holistic agenda, actually, that aim to address entire concern. This is like a cherry picking in every committee. And developed countries have been striving for reform that highlight transparency aspect and review on spatial and differential treatment for developing countries, where developing countries with massive economic powers should not claim blanketed spatial differential treatment and to apply market-oriented WTO policies. In response, this is just a story. Developing countries refuse to give up their developmental rights through spatial differential treatment, which is the only tool for developing countries to level their playing field in international trade, right? And I think this will be the debate on this issue has not brought any positive achievement now, but only a new stanza of battle between trade liberalization and also development. And lastly, last issues that also happened in WTO is the debate on the relevance of WTO and its agreement vis-a-vis the COVID-19 pandemic. The debate has risen up following concern over WTO reaction to this situation, as well as demand to utilize available policy space remedies within WTO agreements. Several members have initiated proclaim political commitment in keeping the smooth supply of medicines, personal protective equipment, medical equipment, and food product, and therefore to avoid application of restrictive measures surrounding the mentioned goods. Others have also demanded the application of stricter monitoring mechanism in order to ensure that no member shall apply restrictive measures during the pandemic. So this is like a policing mechanism. In the other hand, several members views that this pandemic has been an alarming condition, so that intellectual property barriers should be abolished to ensure the availability of essential goods such as vaccines, medicines to the public to combat this pandemic. Okay, so what in conclusion that I would like to say from the illustration that I have mentioned here, and the story of WTO to be more let's say to be more relevant now is clearly reflected the complication of issue within WTO. It's like an iceberg in the Rough Sea. It's like a Titanic between the iceberg. Therefore, it is indeed a great homework, I think, to be done, not only by several members that envisions more advanced WTO and more advanced that could follow what so-called the fourth industrial revolution, but also it need to have a broader cooperation between members in order to maintain the relevance of WTO in international trade, starting from mitigation of trust issues, I think, because the problem of trust now is very imminent, and to revive the spirit cooperations between members. Without any of this element, I think this organization will not be anything but, of course, complete pandemonium. I think that's more or less what I would like to say about the what is happening now in WTO, the role of WTO, and what is WTO effort now, what is happening now in WTO in keeping this organization relevant. I give it back the I return the microphone to moderator. Thank you very much.
Okay, there's a video. I'm sorry for the interruption. Connection. Okay, sorry for the Sorry for the technical actually we have some problem before, so I cannot summarize in our campus. Thank you, Mr. Guru, for your presentations regarding the WTO. WTO. Cannot summarize fully what. Okay, I'm really sorry. I use my colleague account to continue this seminar. Okay, now we are moving to the question and answer sessions. For these sessions, I will open for participants to convey or to deliver the question directly before I read the comment in the chat box here. Just raise your hand and then unmute your speaker and then turn on your computer. Anybody? Okay, if there is no, we'll read the questions in the chat box.
Chat. There are some questions on the chat.
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat sections. The first is from, sorry, mana ya?
Siapa yang bisa menentukan kategori negara-negara
Dia Maharani to Professor Kakaya that international trade can improve and develop a country economic, referring to what has happened in Indonesia recently. The rejections of the omnibus law on job creations by the Indonesian society. This certain creates its own dilemma. On the one side, the government is trying to cut the bureaucratic chains of many permits and to facilitate investment, which is aimed at improving the Indonesian economy by the regulation and the bureaucratization. This for some reasons. One of the reasons is that the government only pro to the investor need. So from these conditions, Dia Maharani asked Professor Kakaya's opinion. For maybe I ask Professor Kakaya to answer this question first, and then we'll continue.
Thank you, Kurani, very much.
Okay, Professor Kakaya, the time is yours.
Thank you. I see there is also another questions before this from Milda, which I will answer if you give me the time to answer that question as well. I was just mentioning that there was another question. There is also another question from Milda Istikoma, which was before this question, but I'll answer them in an order you gave me. So on the question about the omnibus law, I think this is an important or a concrete example of the policy dilemma that many developing countries, including the government in Indonesia, face in a global economy. In order to integrate and maximize the benefit of globalization and the fourth industrial revolution, you need to introduce beyond the border reforms, including competition law, intellectual property, investment, labor law, and reducing the cost of doing business in order to ensure that Indonesia is an attractive investment environment. The government has also saw that per capita GDP growth over the last 2 years has dropped, and the current COVID crisis has also posed challenges as well to the government. So this reform is part of a broader reform that many countries put in place. As you know, laws need to be updated in order to reflect economic conditions. And many of the laws that have been consolidated in this 15th chapter omnibus law date back to some of them even to colonial periods. So you could see that there is a justification for streamlining all these laws and making the country more attractive. But also, as we just heard now from the presentation, Indonesia is also committed to meeting the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, which require simultaneously meeting economic growth, social equity, as well as protection of the environment. And the new rules are supposed to reflect the new conditions. The challenges, however, is that like all other aspects of the new industrial revolution, many the benefits of this industrial revolution and technologies are not automatic. So there will be, and there is concern about data privacy, but also about job losses, about job security, about social integration. We heard a little bit earlier about access to business opportunities. And those are the real concern. And these real concerns are in Indonesia, they're in Europe, they're in the United States. So there are legitimate concerns that labor and also business are concerned about. The law, the omnibus law, which was adopted, if I remember correctly, at the end of now, I think in October, like all law, is very general. So you still have to develop, Indonesia still have to develop detailed regulations that will allow Indonesia to implement. So business is, on one hand, is waiting to see how the detailed regulation will be for the implementation, but also labor and other social stakeholders also want to know the detailed regulations. For example, it's true that the current law on environmental protection is much stricter than new proposed law. But if you look around, Indonesians are worried that there is no respect for this environmental protection. There's a lot of violations of wood logging, forest, because of monitoring, because of lack of adequate supervision and the rest. So maybe the new law may be better implemented. If there is a better implemented, it might allow the government to achieve its objective. So there are possibilities. The second thing, like for labor protections, at the moment, I think if I remember well, law number 13 of 2003 allow the severance payment of up to, I think, 32 times the minimum salary if workers are fired. But most of the workers don't have the money to file for the courts for the payment if the business don't pay. So you can see it's if the new law allow for better protection and make it easier, I think this will be in the interest of Indonesia. But the devil is in detail, is how these regulations and the implementation of these laws, both from the social and employment aspects, as well as from business, will determine the success of this policy and maintain this over a long time. I hope this answered the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Kakaya. Is there any feedback from Ibu Dia?
Thank you, Ibu Rika. Thank you, Professor Hasan Kakaya. I got so many point of view from your explanation, and I appreciate so much that you know very well about the condition in Indonesia at the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will going to read two other questions from Indra Iswara. He is a doctoral law student. His questions goes to Dr. Sukarmi. Is the regulation that used to regulate electronic agreement need to arrange on Indonesian Information and Electronic Transaction Act? Because our regulation isn't enough to regulate about it, how to solve it? And then the second questions goes to Professor Kakaya as well, from Milda, from the UNSW Australia. I have question, Professor Kakaya. What is the real background of US versus China trade, and how Indonesia is affected by this war? Thank you. Okay, I will give the time to Ibu Sukarmi first, and then Professor Kakaya.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Moderator. Yeah, Mr. Indra, I agree with your question. Indonesia now has a POSIS law of number 11 of 28 on electronic information and transaction, which has been amended by law number 19, 2016. We know that there are still generic and nature. This regulation are not sufficient to solve various legal problem that appear from the development on transaction that's secure. So for that, there is needs to be regulation or a reform, law reform that's more specific regarding electronic transaction that deal with business. For example, e-commerce. As an important note, the intended regulation of e-commerce is not oriented to be regulation of technological issues, but it's more emphasis on the pattern of relationship among actors in e-commerce transaction. So I think this is very important, because if the regulation of e-commerce transaction or information and electronic is based on technological aspect, this legal regulation will inevitably become quickly out of date or absolutely. The reason is that change in technology and information almost certainly occur not in a matter of days, but in seconds. So I think there is needs to amendment and to needs to progress in our law, because there is cannot cover the development of the technology and information. I think that is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Sukarmi. And I would like to give the time to Professor Kakaya to answer the third questions.
Thank you very much. Can you allow me to share my screen? Because the answer to this question is on the slide.
Okay, sure.
Do you get my screen? No?
Yes, we can see it, Professor.
Okay. So in the answer to this question, I didn't have to come in detail, but you can read on it. You will receive my slides. That is the last line at the of this slide. The important point to remember is that how to integrate industrial and development policy into the global rule-based WTO system. And this issue is clearly not only to China, but it's also for developing countries. And the answer to the question as what is at stake, I would say that Made in China 2030 is at the core of the trade dispute between Washington and not only US, but also other trading partners. Now, the reason for that is that it provides for the state-owned enterprises to be the driving force in development, and it gives an advantage to state-owned enterprises over foreign companies. It also claimed by a number of China's trading partners that China forced acquisition of transfer of technology, and also the lack of intellectual property respect, which have some issues about industrial securities. It's also about subsidies, and also many other scholars have added that the Belt and Road Initiative is another area which China has developed a strategy to move on to gaining a super advantage of other developed country in this process. Now, as you know, this strategy it's date back from when it was introduced in 2015, but it also replaces the old state emerging industries of 2006, which expand the focus. The difference in this sector is that the new strategy 2030 calls for 70% made locally in this. Now, going back, is let's remember what's wrong with this development strategy compared to our issue with the WTO, because the dispute is on trade. We have to remember that when China was introduced to WTO, it was made on two conditions. One, that it will be considered a non-market economy for 15 years, with the memberships. And secondly, that it will receive continuous scrutiny of its own domestic policies in order to ensure that it is consistent with those obligations. But this is clearly found that after 15 years, when China has asked for its market-stated economy, it was declined, and it has not yet been restored. But a couple of weeks ago, China actually made a statement that it considered its economy a non-market economy. And in fact, now the language, if it's translated correctly from Chinese, I don't speak Chinese, is that we're talking about systemic rivalry. In other words, different system rivaled in the world economy, and this clearly has implication for the reform of the WTO in the long run. Now, what this dispute between China and I think from our perspective we're talking about here, and reform and for the new overall governance, is that it actually exposed an underlying tension between developing countries and the developing country about what kind of development strategies are consistent with WTO rules. Now, developing countries clearly and have been awarded special and differential treatment, and see this special and differential treatment and policy space to promote their national perspective, and should be competent and consistent with WTO rules. Developing countries see that this is not exactly the case. But in addition to this environment, clearly multinational and large trading partners play a role in the lobby to their own member countries that they are favoring or facing unfavorable circumstances in the international trade system. And of course, this complicates the negotiators of the Geneva initiative and groups. Now, I want to bring back to remind that the same countries who are talking about reforming WTO and market consistency with the rule-based system have also committed themselves to the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And in that, you can see that there are very clear objectives that countries must achieve sustainable development in all three dimensions: economic, social, and environmental simultaneously. But in practice, to translate these challenges in trade policy has been very, very difficult. Just to show you some of the commitment of these SDGs to WTO and reform, I am quoting from the Addis Ababa Action Plan of Actions. And you can see just from, let's say, goal 17, strengthening the mean of the implementation and revitalization of the global partnership, there are very specific commitments where countries commit to promote a universal rule-based, open, non-discriminatory, and equitable multilateral system under the World Trade Organization, including the conclusion of the negotiation of the Doha round, which have not been completed. Special treatment for least developing countries, duty-free, quota-free market access for developing countries, and the list is long. So really what at the heart of this discussion is whether and what kind of development and industrial policies developing countries, and of course China took the lead because it has been the first one to break through this process, can be, which kind of strategies and policies are consistent with a multilateral rule-based system that will come out from this new negotiations and reform that we're talking about. I hope this answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kakaya. Now we are going to the last questions from Ikaning Tias from the Faculty of Law. The questions goes to Mr. Guru, Mas Guru. The question is in early 2020, Indonesia classified as developed country. With consequence, Indonesia cannot enjoy SND treatment as developing country. So there is like improvement from developing country to developed country. Actually, which institutional that decide the classifications of WTO members? Okay, Mas Guru, please.
Okay, thank you for questions. I think questions by Ika is very it's troubling me personally, because I think the expression is not about Indonesia developed or developing countries, because because developing country status or development status of the countries within WTO is self-declared. So it's, if you regard yourself as developing countries, you are developing countries. And the issues that referred by Ika, I think it's about the publication by the World Bank in the early of this years that categorize Indonesia as the upper middle income countries. But let me see also try. I also would like to connect the dot between this issue, because it seems that if you are upper middle income countries, it seems that you are could be your SND right could be disregarded. So this is actually the advocation that have been made by many developed countries, especially the US, because US right now is trying to not just reform, to reset. We can call it to reset WTO. That's why they have like a proposals in order to reset this WTO by proposing that developing countries that fall into category, for example, member of OECD, member of G20, is cannot receive or cannot claim the blanketed SND. But of course, they still could pursue their trade interests by negotiation based on their need. So the problem now, while the general understanding in WTO is developed countries helping developing countries, including LDC, to increase their capacity and contribution into the world trade, with this proposal, it seems that US, for example, is trying to pull out or withdraw facilitation or a facility that given to all developing countries, so that the negotiation or the direction of discussion, it seems that the SND only given to LDCs. So the discussion is wide ranging now, whether, for example, in the subsidies, fishery subsidies negotiation, developing countries need to have the SND, for example, because let's say Indonesia, we have like a 3 or 5 million fisheries people working in the fisheries or fishermen. We have more. We have place in the 2 biggest fisheries production in terms of landing capacity. And because of this number, it seems that you are developing countries, but you have a big capacity, so that you need to adjust that, and you don't need to have like a SND. While Indonesia think that the SND is important, because most people that working in the fishery sectors is coming from the small scale, for example, or artisanal fishers. So this kind of debate is a classical debate that maybe coming from it's already coming from the beginning of the Uruguay round discussion on GATT, and until now, and maybe until we have let's say a conclusion or intention to reform WTO. This discussion, ideological discussion, will also shape the situation. I think that's my response to Ika questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Guru, for the answer. And now we finally came to the end of part of this seminar, the closing session. Or before that, Dr. Safina?
Yeah, may I just add something? May I have just 1 minute to add something to the last question?
Yep, okay.
Thank you. Just 1 minute. I think I was impressed with the previous presentation. But looking a bit forward, I would say that the world we live in today, because of the fourth industrial revolution, and because the world today and the future will depend heavily on IT, on computing, on different production and processing system worldwide, those areas have not yet been regulated and have not yet been submitted to international rule as such. And this provides Indonesia and other developing emerging economy a big space to negotiate rules that suit their own development strategies. Because the 1947 GATT and even the Uruguay round, developing countries did not have much big to say in this. It was basically dictated and set up abroad and brought, and whatever left for negotiation was very limited. Today, in this current reform, developing countries have an important, powerful position to negotiate the rules on technology, on competition, on investment, on global processing systems that will seek their own productions. Why? Because the traditional sectors, production of goods, are getting less and less important, and they depend themselves on the new services and sectors that need to be regulated beyond the border and domestically. And in that sense, developing countries like Indonesia have enormous policy space to design these policies. So there is hope in this area. It's a tough road, but I think there is hope for reforming the system that is pro-development. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kakaya. Maybe Dr. Safinas will add something to those questions before. Okay, if there is no, then we finally came to the end of the sessions. Before close the seminar, I would like to ask the presenter to give concluding remark, maybe about 1 minute for each presenter. I give Professor Kakaya the time first, and then Pak Guru, Dr. Safinas, and then the last Bukarmi.
Well, I would just say thank you so much for and congratulations for organizing this very important event in very difficult circumstances, but it's extremely rich in terms of the discussions for this. I was very happy to speak here, and I would just say I will put my email on the chat for if there are additional questions or comments from the participants or students for this. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Pak Guru, sure.
Thank you very much. I also would like to extend my great thanks to University of Brawijaya Faculty of Law for having this discussion. This is also very benefit not only to you maybe, but of course for me, because this is I could understand and I could learn also from the scholars what is the view outside of the WTO building in for example. And for the presentation that I have made, I will send to the organizer later, maybe a kind of the paper about what I have explained or I have present this morning. And thank you very much and congratulations for this success of this conference. Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Safinas, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry because the line is quite bad. I'm not sure, I can't really hear. So sorry. But thank you very much to the organizing committee, and nice to see everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Safinas. Bukarmi, I think she's quite busy because in this time, she also has to make some examinations to the students. Okay, before closing this seminar, I would like to thank Professor Kakaya, Dr. Safinas, Mas Guru, and then Bukarmi for very interesting and informative presentations. And also for the participant for active participations. Hopefully this seminar will be beneficial for everybody. Okay, and thank you very much for the committee. Billahi taufiq hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. Maybe for the keynote speaker, you may leave this room because after this we gonna move to plenary sessions. And for the participant, I will read the announcement from the committee. To all participants, after this seminar, please kindly change your name on the screen according to the plenary sessions which you wish to join. Actually, already 2 p.m. and 4 minutes. The options are 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe participant already received the rundown from the committee, so just kindly check your rundown. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
For all of the participants, I would like to remind you to kindly choose one of the 4 plenary sessions on 2 p.m. today. For plenary session 1, we have the topic economic, trade, and competition law. For plenary session 2, we have also economic, trade, and competition law. For plenary session 3, we have aspects of business and crimes. And plenary session 4, we have aspects of law in Indonesia. So please kindly change your name on the screen to one of the plenary sessions, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So our host or our committee can identify you to join the breakup room. For those of you later presenting at 3:30, you later can change again your name at the defending time. Thank you. Sekali lagi Bapak Ibu yang masih di room utama untuk menentukan atau memilih salah satu plenary session untuk jam 2 ini ada plenary session 1, 2, 3, dan 4. Nanti kalau akan bergabung dengan plenary session setelahnya, itu nanti bisa diganti lagi namanya di jam 3.30. Agar nanti host kita atau panitia bisa mengidentifikasi Bapak Ibu masuk plenary session yang mana agar bisa dimasukkan breakout room. Terima kasih.